Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Tal August, and today I will be talking with you about when and how to adapt plain language summaries to communicate science with different general audiences. Now, before jumping in, I want to give a quick overview of what I mean by communicating science. So, science communication is the sharing and explaining of scientific findings to the general public. Its goal is to increase public awareness, enjoyment, and understanding about science. Now, what's especially difficult about science communication is that almost everyone is a stakeholder in science, meaning that depending on who a science communicator is trying to reach, the language that they use might be quite different. Now, the current approach to overcome this issue is to write for a specific audience. Scientific American, for example, is usually assuming a college-educated audience for reading their magazine, while Science or Nature, at least the magazine arms, usually assume those with a graduate degree in a science. However, this means that other general audiences, though they might have an interest in learning about a new scientific finding, are left out of the conversation. What if there were a way to create scientific summaries on demand for different envisioned audiences? So as you might guess, one possible answer to this question are language models. Language models can simplify text for different envisioned audiences. For example, you can prompt ChatGPT to simplify some text for a fifth grader or a sixth grader or a seventh grader. And this could be an exciting new way of communicating science with different audiences. You can prompt models for a particular envisioned audience and get different responses, which you then use to adapt language for different readers. So let's see how this might work in practice. Here's a sentence from the research paper introducing GPT-3 in 2020. So here we show that scaling up language models greatly improves task-agnostic few-shot performance, sometimes even reaching competitiveness with prior state-of-the-art fine-tuning approaches. So this is what I get when I ask ChatGPT to explain this text like I was a fifth grader. This study found that making language models bigger makes them much better at doing different tasks without needing lots of training. Sometimes these bigger models even do as well or better than the older ways of training them. And this is what I get when I prompt ChatGPT with a CS graduate student. This study highlights the benefits of increasing the size of language models, showing improved task performance without the need for extensive fine-tuning. It suggests that larger models can compete with and sometimes outperform previous state-of-the-art methods. So it's clear that the model is generating different text for these different audiences, right? And it seems like this text varies in the ways that we would expect. The fifth grader version used shorter sentences, simpler words compared to the CS graduate version. But what's not clear is how different audiences actually respond to this generated text. When do we need to simplify and how much do we need to simplify depending on who our audience is? So in this talk, I'll cover our project investigating how changes in scientific text affect the reading experience of different general audience readers. And by general audience readers, I mean those without advanced degrees or careers in science. So this isn't someone who's doing research or is research adjacent, but someone who might read about a new study in a newspaper or a magazine. So our guiding research question was, how does changing language complexity impact readers with different background knowledge? And we answered this question by recruiting participants to read summaries of scientific papers written at 3 levels of complexity. So before going into how we wrote those summaries, I'll give a quick overview of our study design. So the study was a within-subject study where we recruited participants from Mechanical Turk, and after collecting demographic information, we had participants read a summary of a scientific paper, and the summary was broken down into accordions that answered key questions about the paper. So for example, what did the paper study or what did the paper find? And after reading these summaries, participants answered questions about their reading experience and familiarity with the summary's topics. And for the study, participants read 3 summaries, one at low complexity, one at medium complexity, and one at high complexity. So the second 2 steps, reading a summary and then responding with familiarity measures and reading measures, was repeated 3 times for a study. Now, we measured reader background by asking participants after they read a summary how familiar they were with the summary's topic. And we measured reading experience by asking participants to rate how easy it was to read a summary, how interesting they found the summary, how valuable they found the information in the summary, and how confident they were in their understanding of that information. We also included 2 quantitative measures of reading engagement. The first was how many sections participants skipped in each summary. So as I had mentioned, the summaries were broken up into accordions, and each accordion was a section that kind of answered a key question about the paper. And these accordions started closed, and participants weren't required to open all the accordions in order to move on to the next stage of the study. So we measured how often participants skipped sections or accordions, and we kind of used this as conveying how if they were potentially uninterested or overconfident in that text. And the second measure was how often participants requested the original research paper after reading a summary, and I refer to this as click-throughs. So participants could click a button at the bottom of a summary to request the original paper at the end of the summary, and so we measured how often participants made this request. So we answer 3 research questions by repeating the study design 3 times, each time with a different set of scientific summaries. So our first research question was, how do participants of different backgrounds respond to human-written scientific text at different complexity levels? Our second question was, how do participants of different backgrounds respond to machine-generated scientific text at different complexity levels? And our third was, how do participants respond to generated scientific summaries at different complexities if they report on similar information? So I'll go into our first 2 research questions first, as the setup was pretty much the same for them and the findings were pretty much the same. Research question 3, I'll talk about afterward, since kind of our findings from our first 2 research questions flowed into our third question. So to make these summaries, we hired an expert science writer to author 3 versions of scientific summaries for a set of 10 papers, which we'd collected off of R-Science, which had been shared widely on the subreddit R-Science. So this writer was instructed to write the low complexity summaries aimed at a high school educated adult, the medium summaries at a college educated audience, and the high summaries at researchers in the field. And the high summaries, because it was kind of aimed at other researchers, the author created by selecting sentences from the original paper, so more of an extractive method rather than authoring the summaries themselves. And then we did some post-editing, kind of make the high summaries flow similarly to the low and medium summaries. For study 2, we generated our summaries by prompting GPT-3 and then ranking generated summaries by a complexity scoring tool, and then selected the highest and lowest scoring summaries as our medium and low versions. And then we kept the high complexity summaries the same for these 2 studies, as well as for our third study. And the prompts that we use for GPT-3 in this case were a series of prompts that asked GPT-3 to simplify the scientific text for a particular grade level. So it went from first grade all the way through 12th grade, as well as college-educated adult. Now, because of the risk of giving incorrect scientific information due to model hallucinations, we also curated the generated summaries for factuality before running our studies. And so we looked at the generated summaries, and anytime the generated summaries included incorrect text or incorrect information, we regenerated or selected a different summary. So here are some of the examples of the expert written summaries. Notice how in the medium summary, words like external stimuli are removed, and in the low summary, words like diagnostic and therapeutic are also gone. Also notice how in the low summaries, there's also not any discussion of what potential applications are. So it's also kind of removing some information compared to the high summary. I'll get more into that in our third research question, but just wanted to highlight it here. So as I said, I'll cover our findings across the first 2 studies together as they were surprisingly consistent. Then I'll go into our final study. So overall, we found that participants with low topic familiarity benefited from lower complexity summaries, but participants with high topic familiarity did not. So this figure plots participants' ratings of how easy it was to read a summary written at one of the 3 levels of complexity, going from low at the top to high at the bottom. The dark orange bars correspond to the lowest reading ease, so not at all easy to read, while the dark purple bars indicate the highest reading ease, so very easy to read. On the y-axis, we have these 3 complexity levels, and you'll notice that the low complexity gets the most very ratings, these dark purple ratings, and the least not at all ratings, and vice versa for the high complexity, which gets the most not at all ratings. But this is for participants with low familiarity. And those differences disappear for people with the highest familiarity instead. Indeed, you can see actually that the medium summaries are getting the most very ratings now compared to the low. And we see the same trend for our other reading experience measures, so how valuable participants found the information, how interesting they found the summaries. And we also saw this for participant click-throughs. So participants with low familiarity clicked through, so requested the original article more often when they were presented with the lowest complexity text compared to higher complexity text. Now, a more interesting picture appears when we look at skipped sections. So far what we're seeing is that low complexity text benefits low familiarity readers, but there's really no benefit for high familiarity readers. However, what we noticed was that participants with higher familiarity skipped more sections of lower familiarity text. Specifically, the limitation sections were the most often skipped in the summaries. So this suggests that while high familiarity participants might have rated all the summary versions similarly, they did tend to ignore more information in the less complex summaries, which might have been due to boredom or overconfidence. Okay, what about for our third study? So in our first two studies, the less complex summaries also contained much less information. And this is standard practice for science communication. Usually a plain language summary or a blog post will convey less information than the original paper because it's difficult to explain all the details of a paper in simple language, right? If you're explaining everything in a paper, it's going to be an incredibly long amount of text. So you're really selecting the highlights to explain. But after seeing our results from our first two studies, we are curious if we would see the same effects of lower complexity if summaries explained all information across the complexity levels. So these were still summaries because we weren't explaining the entire paper, but what would happen if the low complexity summaries explained all the same information as the high complexity summaries? So in study 3, we instructed models to explain rather than remove any information in the most complex summaries. And this is kind of example of part of what the prompt was for models in our third study. So define any necessary terms and provide any background knowledge that a reader who is not at all familiar with the topic might need. And we did this sentence by sentence. So instead of allowing the model to remove sentences or removing information, we really wanted the model to simplify every sentence. This led to much longer low and medium summaries, but those summaries contained all the same information as the high summaries. And we verified this manually as well as with automated measures. So to briefly summarize our findings from our third study, what we found was that generally the trend held for lower complexity being better for lower familiarity participants. But in the case of these longer planar summaries, low complexity was really only useful for people with no familiarity with the summaries topic at all. So here I'm showing the not at all familiar ratings, and you can kind of see the same trend as high complexity summaries still get the most not at all ratings and the least very ratings. But even by the time you get to somewhat familiar, so this is, 2 or 3 on a 5-point scale, you start to see that the reading ease ratings, as well as the other reading measures, all kind of equalize across the different complexity versions. And this trend also held true for click-throughs and skipped sections, as for our first two studies. So higher familiarity participants skipped more sections of the lower familiarity or of the lower complexity summaries. So based on our findings, we have 3 suggestions for writing these sorts of plain language summaries. The first is that low complexity is great for low familiarity participants, as well as when you don't have a lot of strong information needs. So you can use lower complexity text. It will often remove information, but it's best for those with low familiarity. The second is that high complexity is best for higher familiarity. So more complex summaries, even when that text is drawn from the original research paper, as it was in the case of our high complexity summaries, are better when a reader has more background knowledge in the field, even if they're not experts. So I want to emphasize that background knowledge in this case doesn't mean you're a researcher in the field, but just that you might be a hobbyist, or you might be interested in it. You might have read, earlier blog posts about it as well, or you just might feel more confident reading that sort of language. You might have taken a class on it once. Plain language, and then our third suggestion is that plain language can still contain high information. So if you need to simplify a lot of language, but you need to keep all the information in there, language models can actually be used to generate these plain language summaries that preserve these details, as we saw in study 3. But these summaries really only benefit those with very little knowledge of a scientific topic and should be used sparingly and really only when necessary. So who can take away what from this research? The findings I covered in this talk have implications for science communicators and interface designers. So for science communicators, so either editors or authors interested in communicating with a broader audience, these findings can help communicate to different audiences by generating summaries at different complexities as a support tool for creating summaries flexible to the diverse range of readers that are impacted by scientific advances. And for interface designers, they can take these findings to design interactive and adaptive reading interfaces. So for example, if you can generate multiple summaries for different readers or different versions of text for different readers, readers could interactively decide on what text works best for them while they're reading. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions now. And if you're interested, we also have a demo link kind of showing how these plain language summaries could be used in practice.